Hello. Welcome to Black Metal and Brews, a program in which I drink beer, talk about heavy metal, and on many occasions, like this one, speak with people who have similar passions to myself. As you probably have noticed, I tend to start these by posting the current live link to people. So give me 2 seconds, dear viewer, especially if you're not watching live. It's probably silly, but here we go. This link. Jeez, and of course I just accidentally opened up some sort of portal to the hell world that is coding. There we go. Cool. So I got those links posted. So, if you are watching, you're watching. Thank you for being here. It's been a tumultuous week in the world, and we're going to take a little time to be together and unwind. Today I'm going to be joined by Adem Tepedelen. He's the author of the Brewtal Truth Guide to Extreme Beer, Brewtal spelled B-R-E-W, much like the brews in my website. He's had a column of the Brewtal Truth name for Decibel Magazine for 13, 14, 15 years. I don't know. We'll talk to him when he joins us. And he's been writing about music and beer for a long time. Music since before I existed, and beer for quite a long time. So we're blessed to have an older, wiser individual here to join me. And well, today I will be drinking Parlons. I have no fucking idea. From the Suarez Family Brewery in New York. It is an oak-ripened country beer of mixed fermentation, rested upon whole cherries for a good long while. And it's a plum beer, so you got plum, aged on cherries, and sounds really good. Suarez Family is well reputed and with good reason. So gonna be sipping on that and talking to a lovely gentleman. I hope that you are well, as well as one can be when many of us are still, on a helpful, necessary, sadly, lockdown. So, strange, scary world, but also we're making do as best as we're able, right? I'm gonna pull this just a little closer to me. There we go. So we'll do the pour. We're just at this point just waiting for Adam to join. I told him to come in a minute or two late since it takes me a minute to do my little preamble. Look at that. That is lovely. I can smell from here. Oh, it smells so lovely, kind of that funky, fruity sort of thing. You can really see some great effervescence there. Lovely, frothy little head. And just like that, Adam is here. So
I'm in my car.
Hello, Adam. How are you?
I'm good, Ben. How are you?
That's great. I'm doing okay. It's great to see you. We've never done a video chat like this, so I'm really excited to have you here.
Yeah, likewise. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Stoked to talk with you.
Yeah. No, it's an honor. I just gave a brief explanation of who you are and what you've done, but obviously I've got the Cliff Notes knowledge. You have the lived experience. I'm curious, just because you've given me a wealth of things, and I know that you used to post, or I'm sure you've still got them more to post, clips of zines you made in the 80s.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what was your gateway to heavy music? Because I know at that point rock and roll and heavy metal were a little more fused. But
yeah, it's kind of funny because my gateway was I just was into music from a very early age, quite honestly, and so I was listening to the Beatles when I was a little kid. But I remember in the 70s, Kiss was sort of my primary gateway. And a lot of people who are into heavy metal who are my age will probably tell you the same thing. I mean, most musicians will say that like the guitarist will all say Ace Frehley was the one that inspired them. And it was kind of the same for me. So, back then, I decided once I heard Kiss and bands like Foreigner, anything that had sort of like loud guitars, I decided I loved. And this was when I was in grade school, and so that sort of my journey began from there. I had an older brother that listened to Led Zeppelin, and so whatever I could get my hands on that was loud and distorted, I was into. So I just I kept exploring from there, and just because of my age and sort of what happened in metal circa like 1980 with the sort of the start of I guess it was 79, but I didn't really become aware of the new wave of British heavy metal until probably 80 or 81. And then I started seeking that stuff out, and I had a good friend I'm not sure how I met this guy, but his name was KJ Doughton. His name still is KJ Doughton, and he lived in Oregon. Also, I lived on the Oregon coast, and he lived in Oregon, and he did metal zines. But more importantly, he was the head of the Metallica fan club before. I mean, when they had basically a demo out. So he was a tape trader, and he turned me on to tons of underground metal back then. Venom, Merciful Fate, Angel Witch, lots of European stuff, and even demos from American metal bands like Black and Blue, just like all kinds of bands that were all back then. It was all just metal, right? And now we look back at some of those bands and we go, well, some of them are metal and some of them are hard rock, but it was just like, you were trying to get your hands on anything that was loud and distorted. So KJ was real pivotal in my journey. And more importantly, and sorry that this is long-winded, but more importantly, he inspired me to do my own fanzine, because he had done his own fanzine, and he was a few years older than me. But I don't know. I just decided I was going to do my own fanzine, and luckily we had a computer at home, which was like unusual for 1984 or something like that. So I would type up my reviews and print them out and then lay them out and just have the zines photocopied. And if I would do interviews either in person or via mail, you send the band a set of questions and they'd respond, and then I type it up. But early on, I got to interview King Diamond in person when I was about 17, and when it was literally Merciful Fate's first show in the United States, and it happened to be in Portland, Oregon. So I got to do an interview with King Diamond, and that scared the crap out of me. I'll tell you what, I was a little nervous about that. But he was really cool, and actually I've interviewed him a lot since then. But that was eye-opening. I also got to interview Kirk Hammett when I was the same age, when they were on the Ride the Lightning tour with Armored Saint in person. And that was like a big, life changer for me as well, because all these bands were, bands I really looked up to and worshipped and was interested in. Unfortunately, I only did a few issues of my zine. I did 2 issues of Heavy Heroes. That was the first one I did. And then I did 1 issue of West Coast Thrash, which had the Metallica interview in it. So that kind of got me started. And this was roughly 84 to 86. And I liked writing. So I used to write some reviews for my school newspaper, metal reviews for my school newspaper. So I think that's sort of what got me started on writing about metal. I always loved metal. I always have, always will, but that's how I got to writing about metal.
Oh, that's really cool, and I just gotta say, I'm jealous that you got to go to shows in the '80s. I spent most of the '80s learning to walk, so
it was a cool time in a lot of ways. the interesting thing is that there just weren't that many bands. There weren't that many metal bands now, especially like in the early '80s. As the '80s progressed, there were a ton, obviously that popped up, and but as far as what was available on not CD, but vinyl, was pretty limited. You know, I've been talking to Decibel about, they do these special issues on specific years, and I've been trying to push for 1983 because I feel like that's a really was a crucial year in a lot of ways. It was like when Kill 'Em All came out, and a bunch of other of my favorite albums ever came out. But when you start looking at the actual number of heavy metal albums that came out that year, or hard rock or whatever, there aren't that many. There's like, a few dozen, like total.
Yeah.
Today there's, probably a few dozen came out this week. I don't know. I'm exaggerating, but it was different.
Probably not.
Yeah, well, maybe not. I don't know, but there just weren't as many. And obviously, as the '80s progressed, there were more and more and more. But back then, if you were into this kind of music, you just got your hands on whatever you could. And so I was listening to Motley Crue, and I was just as into Motley Crue as I was Metallica or Slayer back then, because it was just all loud and obnoxious and whatever, rebellious. So now everything's like, oh, you're either into this or you're into this or into this, and you can't like this. So but yeah, it was a cool time. It was different though, very different.
Yeah, I think, and maybe it's this way for everybody, but for me, I mean, I've never stopped loving music like you. I was a Beatles kid, and it just, I loved music. But I think that my best time with heavy metal was when I knew that I loved it, but didn't know enough to delineate genre or filter out what I could or should not be listening to for any given reason. And I was just, I mean, obviously this was early aughts. It was a very different time. I was just like, oh, I'm going to pick up a sampler CD from every record label I can find and just buy every one of those bands' albums because I like them all, because I'm just, omnivorous with it.
Yeah. That's like your exploratory period when you're sort of figuring it all out, and also, quite honestly, when you do find that love of it, you do want to sort of explore what's out there, what's available, what do I like, what do I don't like, so that, I mean, that makes total sense. I guess the only different perspective I had was that what was available and out there was a lot more limited, and so exploring those was a lot easier in a lot of ways. Although the funny thing is that there was, like, back then there were such a thing as imports, which were I know that those exist today, but they're different in a lot of ways. But there was a record store in Eugene, Oregon that was really also big and influential for me, in that they had owners that were super into heavy metal, and they were probably a good 20 years older than me, and I don't know, I was a teenager and they were adults, but they were super into all the latest metal as well. So you'd come in there and they'd be like, oh, we got this Loudness album from Japan, and they'd play that, and or different crazy stuff from Europe that they could get. So luckily I had a record store like that turned me on to stuff that was not even really readily available or easily available in the United States. So that at least gave a few more options. But yeah, it was, you basically just got a hold of whatever you could. And, some of it I stuck, and some of it, but mostly, I was into whatever, whatever I could get my hands on back then. So yeah.
Yeah. Of course. And so, especially because you were in coastal Oregon, and I think if some people watching may not know, like, that's, even Portland until recently wasn't exactly a destination spot for a lot of bands. What was it like? I mean, going to shows then, was that like it's been 3 months and I'm going to a show sort of ritual?
Yeah. So keeping in mind, I was in high school. So I was at the mercy of a lot of
How did
things.
that work?
Luckily, I had very my parents were pretty cool, basically, as far as me going to shows, because we were not only on the coast, but we were pretty deep on the Southern Oregon coast. So,
Folks, if you're watching, give me just a second. I'm going to take your router and disconnected from Adam. If you're watching, leave a comment. Let me know if you can see me at all. Be right back.
Okay.
Right, let's take a look. All right, there we are. We're back. I don't know what happened. My internet may have dropped, or
okay.
Sorry.
No worries. I was just talking about the Southern Oregon coast and how the closest place for me to see a show basically was Eugene. And so early on in the 80s, I went, and that was an hour and a half away. And luckily I had parents that would drive me to Eugene, and or they would let me go with my older high school friends who had cars. So yeah, a lot of road trips. We weren't, there weren't as many shows, obviously, but I remember early shows in Eugene being like Def Leppard on the Pyromania tour, with I think Uriah Heep, and then Judas Priest on the Screaming for Vengeance tour with a Canadian band called Coney Hatch, and then as I got a little bit older, we would go up to shows in Portland, and luckily, Portland was like 3 hours away, but luckily Portland had all ages shows. So I don't know if this nightclub probably didn't exist back when you were there, Ben, but the Starry Night was, I think it got changed to something else, but the Starry Night, we could go there and they had like a drinking section for people who are, over 21, but the rest of the place, like in front of the stage and stuff, was all ages. So that's where I saw bands like Slayer, Exodus, Megadeth, Merciful Fate, Exciter, Raven. I can't remember. Just tons of bands that were coming through at that time. Now, you're right. It was every few months or something. It wasn't frequently because it was a long haul. But we did get to see some crucial shows, Metallica, Armored Saint, during that time when I was still in high school. But it was I was lucky to have parents that were so permissive in that way, and I was lucky to have friends older than me that could drive, and but we saw some great shows during that time. There's no doubt about it, and I feel very fortunate that I was able to make it up there to see shows like that.
That sounds incredible. Now, especially thinking, I've seen Slayer in an arena. I've seen Metallica in an arena.
Right.
It's very different. And I'm sure in a decade there will be bands that I've seen in clubs that are going to be not club bands anymore. But like I saw Mastodon play like a tiny club on their first album, not their first tour, but
right.
And now they're Mastodon, know. But it's weird. I don't think that happens as much in heavy metal anymore.
May not, but the funny thing is obviously, back then no one had any idea what metal's trajectory was going to be. So we were stoked to see those bands in clubs, but no one is thinking these bands are going to be huge. So I'm going to have a great story to tell someone 30 years from now. Well, they were just like underground bands. I mean, honestly, I don't think I would have ever thought that bands like Slayer or, maybe Metallica, but bands like Slayer getting to the point where they are now, when I saw them back then, it was I would have bet you anything there was no chance that they were going to get to a major label, blah blah blah, whatever, and then become the legends that they did. And part of that was it wasn't really an option for most bands back then. It was a really big deal when Metallica even got signed to Elektra. It's like shocking, So that's a major difference. Is that when we were seeing all this, we were seeing it under the auspices that this was underground, it was going to stay underground, always would be underground, and we're enjoying it now. But we didn't have any idea or ever have any thought that it would, Metallica would become one of the biggest bands ever. I don't know.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. No, it is really crazy. I mean, especially thinking of all of the bands that, theoretically, like they're strange. This is not conventionally appealing music. Even when you look at bands that, people like you and I would consider Metallica pretty palatable. But if I were to try and make that argument to my stepmother, I don't think it would fly as well.
Yeah.
Which is,
Totally. Yeah,
it's interesting.
It's also so much to do with like the metal that you grew up listening to was vastly different, or your introduction, I should probably say, because I mean, you found your way through the various different genres and such, but the sort of a person's process to discovering metal and where they kind of start is super important. I was
Yeah.
just interviewing I can't really give away who this band is. It's going to be a future Decibel Hall of Fame, but basically those
Cool.
guys, the guys I was interviewing are about maybe 10 to 15 years younger than me. And the funny thing that they play a style of music that was, to me, kind of, it seemed kind of dated or whatever. And I was kind of chuckling at the time when I was thinking about, like, why did you guys start playing this music at this particular point in time? Because that kind of music was kind of dated even when you started playing it. And they were like, dude, that's what we grew up listening to. So of course we're going to play that music because that's what we love, And I was like, okay, I get that because that was the music that they, that imprinted on heavy metal too, And so that was sort of, of course, that's what they wanted to play because that's what they loved. That's the kind of metal they loved, So everyone's journey, into the metal world is a little different, and the stuff that you probably are you most appreciate and love, and has special place in your heart music wise is stuff that is from a specific era of your life, I'm guessing. So you'll continue to like it go, but you always have a soft spot for that stuff.
No, it's true. I've I used to not think much about it, but then I realized it's like, oh, my mom had a Suicidal Tendencies CD that she played when I was maybe 10. Because I don't actually know. I mean, she was more of a punk, but they had that. They were both.
Yeah.
And especially given that was the late '90s, that was the age of regrettably, the new metal age. I think the Suicidal Tendencies album, I was like, oh, that's what these other bands are drawing on, and so like through that, I think I started in hardcore, but then I found Black Sabbath. So
mm-hmm.
but it's like I think Sick of It All was my first extreme show.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Which for the 2000s, I guess that's probably a weird one, but.
What's funny is so you talk about hardcore and when I first got interested in hardcore, the metal influences that showed up in hardcore were sort of tended to be like Black Sabbath. You had bands like COC and Black Flag, and for me at the time, it was like kind of made sense because I liked Black Sabbath too, and so it was sort of, that was my gateway into hardcore. And then I found, like, a generation later, a lot of the younger hardcore bands all sounded like Slayer to me. It was sort of like they all found Rain and Blood. I mean, the younger ones, and then they just went from there. So it was very different. Like hardcore, maybe just 10 years later, maybe or whatever after I got into it, was a completely different hardcore.
Yeah, it's true. It's weird because like in metal, there's all these subcategorizations, but hardcore, they just call it hardcore still, despite whatever permutations it takes them. I kind of appreciate that.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
I haven't kept up with hardcore in probably the last 15 years, but as a teenager, it was very important to me. Sometimes you need stuff like that to get you through high school.
Yeah, no, I get it, man. I found it shortly after high school. I mean, actually, I listened to Ramones and stuff that was punk in high school, but I didn't really get to hardcore until probably like mid '80s, and that was like Dead Kennedys and Black Flag and kind of that mostly Southern California or West Coast hardcore rather than the New York hardcore. I didn't really kind of get into that until a few years later. I discovered that, but yeah, high school definitely. That's when you're sort of like the angriest and most. It's when hardcore makes the most sense.
Yeah, no. I mean, if anybody's watching this and you love hardcore in your 30s, no hate. I still have a soft spot, obviously. But I guess, speaking of post high school, the other topic, of course, that we share a love for is beer. When did you develop an interest in beer beyond, the macro lagers that were, dominant in America and I guess worldwide, probably?
Yeah. I guess so. It's gonna get back to imports again. So my first taste of beer that wasn't brewed here in the United States was, I think, I had a friend who worked. This is when I was in Eugene, so I wasn't legally allowed to drink. I was at the University of Oregon. But I had a friend who I was sort of in a band with who worked at this deli, and they had interesting beers from different parts of the world, imports. And so when we would practice, when we'd have band practice, he'd bring a handful of beers with him. And so I would try like these stouts from New Zealand and these strong lagers from South Africa or whatever. And that's when I learned that beer didn't always have to taste the same, and it didn't always have to be, like one of the handful of major brands, Budweiser, Coors, Miller Lite, or Miller, whatever. There was stuff beyond that. And so that was eye-opening to me. And that was sort of like the first entry. And then this was also around the time that microbreweries started opening. That's what they were called back then. And in fact, in Oregon, there was, I sounded like Grandpa Simpson there for a second. I'm sorry about that. In Oregon,
No, I love it.
There was a chain, McMinimans, that was launching in the mid 80s. Well, sort of mid to late 80s. They were opening up brew pubs all over Oregon, and they opened one in Eugene in probably like 87 or 88, something like that. And so it happened to be a half block from my apartment. And so we would go there, and you could get pints for, I think, less than $2. And we would just try whatever they were brewing on premises. So that was really when I was converted officially to micro brews, craft beer. And luckily, being in Oregon, I had easy access to it because, the West Coast and Oregon was, kind of ahead of the curve as far as all that stuff goes. So, yeah, once I could legally drink beer, then we were also buying a lot of Henry Weinhard's at that time. That was sort of like the local good beer to buy, and there were places in Eugene, you could get a 6-pack for $4 or something of bottles. And so yeah, we drank a lot of that as well. But that's sort of when craft beer got on my radar, and and then once you find your way to that, and you like it, then that's it. You don't really go back. And that was how it was for me. I just kept on that path.
Yeah. No, it's kind of, similar to music. It's like once you learn that you like to discover it, it's something you keep doing. And it's funny you mentioned McMinimans because obviously they're still around.
Yeah.
One of my friends, for a while, he's now moved to Massachusetts, but he was one of my buddies because of doing all this, is how we met. He was the head brewer for the Crystal Ballroom location in Portland, and he started like a whole like banned beer concert series. And I remember the first banned beer I had as a consequence of that was he made one for the band Black Breath,
cool.
which I remember the beer was good, and I remember I drank too much of it at the show, so I couldn't give you an analysis of it. But I mean, it was for Black Death, so I feel like that's the kind of show where you're supposed to drink a little more than you normally
Yeah,
would.
exactly. Absolutely. Yeah, McMinimans, I give lots of credit for them really bringing craft beer to Oregon in a big way then. The other gateway for me was so I moved to Seattle after I finished University of Oregon in 1990. And at that time, Widmer, which was a Portland brewery, their Hefeweizen was everywhere. It was on tap everywhere, like in Portland and Seattle. So I go to shows, and that's what people were drinking, especially obviously in Portland. And so that was like an eye opener for me as well because it was cloudy. I could never seen it. It kind of looked like orange juice basically, and so I got into that and drank a lot of that during that time. It's like, again, early 90s. I really associate that with my time in Seattle and seeing a lot of amazing music in the early 90s in Seattle. And the other beer at that time, which was ubiquitous in Seattle, was a Seattle brewery called Red Hook. And their ESB was on tap at every bar. And all you had to do was just ask for a Red Hook, and that's what you'd get, even though Red Hook had other beers, but you would get their extra special bitter, which I think is what gave me my taste for hoppy beers because it was pretty hoppy. It wasn't a typical kind of lower alcohol English bitter. It was definitely more like a West Coast style, almost like an IPA, really. Very similar to an IPA. Had a lot of, it was kind of fruity, had good hop notes, had some of the caramelly aspects of the ESB, but I think it was, maybe 6+% ABV.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a substantial beer. But those two beers were I totally associate with my time in Seattle and Portland area during the early 90s. That again were sort of that cemented my interest in craft beer, and I that you could drink those anywhere, and I drank many of them during that time.
Yeah. No, I think access is what does it. I mean, I'm sure I grew up in Santa Rosa, California, so it was. Uh, when I turned 21, I lived 3 blocks from the Russian River Brewing Company, and
Awesome.
it was over for me before it began. It was just like, oh,
Yeah.
this is where I go for happy hour.
Yeah, you're lucky.
Yeah, no, and also, I'm turning 33 in about a week. So it was an era just before they got big. So there was enough of an operation where they had multiple interesting beers, but you never had to go and wait in a line or anything to get a beer, which, I love good beer, but I'm still not ready to wait in line for beer,
Yeah, it's a weird phenomenon for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you're lucky you had access to a really good brewery there, and that's pretty cool. Having those kinds of places are definitely make it a lot easier to get into craft beer. When you're first, or maybe one of your first experiences is with a brewery like that, then it's a lot easier to get into it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it worked for me. I didn't realize I was a geek until I moved away, and then I was like, oh, I won't. And when did you then decide that writing about beer was going to work for you? Because obviously you were writing about music for a long time already.
Right.
When did you make that next leap?
Well, that's a good question. I don't really know, but so here's my best recollection of this is in the late 90s. So I wrote for a Seattle publication called The Rocket, and I worked as an editor there for years. And that's this is sort of like from 90 till 97 or something. And I was basically a full-time writer, editor as my job, but I kind of got burnt out, and I burnt out on music because honestly, music in the late 90s was just not, or, doing it for me in a lot of ways. So I kind of moved into a different line of work. I became an editor at Canoe and Kayak Magazine, which was nationally distributed, and I really wanted to step up sort of professionally to a better paying job, and just sort of work for a national magazine. So I did that for a couple of years, and then wasn't really doing much music writing at that point in time. And then I took at that point a marketing job at REI, doing again writing, but a different kind of writing, and again sort of a step up in pay. And I was really into fly fishing and a lot of outdoor stuff, camping. I'd always been into that, but I was sort of really focused on that. At some point, I really wasn't doing a lot of freelance music writing, but I was doing some freelance writing. Wasn't doing as much music writing, and I started writing for some local editions of Where magazine, which is basically sort of like it's a visitor magazine. And I started writing for the Seattle version because I had a good friend who worked there, who was an editor there or something, and so he started getting me some freelance work there, and I'd do anything they threw at me. And so I think, whether it be like, to write about the 5 best places in Washington to see leaves in the fall, or wine tasting in Woodinville, or and so one of the things was craft beer, I think, because craft beer was definitely something that people would want to check out when they came to Seattle. There were iconic breweries there at the time, like Pike, and some of the sort of first wave, Red Hook. So I wrote about that, and so over the years, I started writing about beer and wine, and just because it was an interest. It had always been an interest, and it was something that I had a fair amount of knowledge about at this point in time. So as a freelance writer, when I became freelance in 2003, I wanted to write about whatever I could to make money, because if you try to do freelancing and pay bills, it ain't easy. You can't just go, I'm just going to be a heavy metal freelance writer. Good luck with that, because you're not going to be able to pay any bills. You could probably get work, but so I was just doing all kinds of writing, and I just slowly but surely did more and more craft beer stories. And again, it was just based on my interest and my growing knowledge. So it wasn't really my focus. And in fact, before I ever solidly got into beer writing, I co-wrote a wine book. I was very interested in wine, and so I wrote a lot about wine, and I studied wine a lot. And then I started writing for Imbibe magazine in sort of the mid 2000s out of Portland. Great magazine, still being published, and they gave me some really nice opportunities to write about beer for them. And the third story I wrote for them was third or fourth, something like that, was about the hop shortage that was happening, worldwide hop shortage that was happening. I think it was like in 2007 or something. There was this series of catastrophic events, floods and fires, all these different things that sort of happened that kind of all came together to create this perfect storm of hop shortage. Anyway, the story won a journalism award, and it kind of gave me a little entry into the craft beer world, because I could go, look, I won this award for my craft beer writing. And so I started getting more gigs writing about craft beer. At this time, I was also writing for Decibel. So I had, we're finally looping around to how this all ties together. I was writing for Decibel at the time, and I think I probably pitched Albert Mudrian, the editor, something craft beer metal related. My recollection is I did not pitch him a column, because it wasn't on my radar. I just wanted to do a story. I think he came back to me and said, "You want to do a column?" And I said, "Well, yeah, of course." And so that was like, my first column was May 2009 or something like that. And I did it for almost 10 years. And that was the Brewtal Truth column. And just started out writing about beer in a metal magazine. And I didn't really ever, it wasn't my intention to tie the two things together. And it was just I was going to write about beer. And have fun with it. Really, it was always about having fun with it, because it was absurd writing about beer in a heavy metal magazine. I mean, you know, I'm sure a lot of people at the beginning thought that's stupid. Why do I want to read about beer? There's lots of metalheads that don't give a crap about beer, but there were some that apparently enjoyed it, and so it, you know, found its audience, and yeah, as I said, it went on for 10 years, almost 10 years. So,
and yeah, it was a huge inspiration to me. I still remember the first one I read, which was you know, and it was you writing about beers that were, you know, undeniably metal. And I think, and there was multiple, but you know, given that we're going back a decade, maybe more than a decade now, I remember reading about Unibrew's Le Fin du Monde, and thinking, oh, isn't there a band called that too? And I was just like, I thought that was so cool, even though I, you know, and I was already going to the Russian River, but I hadn't put together that it was a niche weird thing, you know, and I was drinking the beer called Damnation over there. I mean, like it was just so clear, like seeing those overlaps. But reading that column, I was like, oh man, like this is articulate and intelligent, you know, and it's a subject that by and large, is, you know, in the world around me was treated as like, these are two things that are for boneheads. And I mean, I love me some simple, stupid heavy metal, but I can still talk about it in a way that communicates to outsiders what it is. And I think seeing you do that was so exciting to me.
oh, thanks.
And it, yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting to me how I think I helped connect the dots for some people with, or not connect the dots, but sort of show people that there were similarities between the two worlds. And I'm sure I turned some people onto beers that they'd never tried before, or considered, or whatever. And I think because my approach was, you know, in fitting with the Decibel tone overall, is, you know, irreverence. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of what Decibel does is they can poke fun at metal and whatever it is they cover, because they're so damn knowledgeable about it. So they're always doing it with, like, they're not doing it ignorantly in a way. They're doing it in a different way. And I tried to do that sort of with the column. I tried to make it approachable and interesting and funny, so that, you know, maybe someone would read something about it and try these weird French Canadian beers, Unibrew, because they had these metal labels or whatever and stuff like that, or names, you know. And so, you know, what I learned, and I think I probably wrote a column about this at some point, was especially when I was looking for metal when I was younger, is that I would look for an album that looked metal, right? Like this Manowar album, you know, I've never heard Manowar, but that looks metal to me, you know. So to a certain degree, there was some of that in the craft beer world as well. Like I started noticing beer names and labels and stuff, and I'd go, oh, well, I'm guessing these guys are probably into heavy metal because they've got a beer named after a Black Sabbath album or something like that, right? So, you know, and then I started, you know, I'd get in contact with these people. Or Dave Whitty, I'll tell you, he's the linchpin to all, in a lot of ways. Anyone who's ever met him will say that too. Oh yeah, because Dave Whitty knows from Municipal Waste and a billion other extreme metal bands. Everyone knows him in the metal world. There's like 1 degree of separation between Dave Whitty and everyone. But he, you know, people have called him, and I totally agree with this, the Johnny Appleseed of the metal craft beer world, because he was just turning on people left and right, people within the scene, within the metal scene, you know, musicians. He was turning, you know, he's like, oh, you got to try this Belgian beer, this amazing imperial stout, whatever. So full credit to Dave Whitty. But someone connected me to him early on in my Brewtal Truth, you know, journey, and that was the best, because he opened doors for me, and also we just, you know, instant friendship,
of course.
And so he steered me off in a lot of different directions. You know, you got to talk to JP from Clutch, and you got to talk to Brawn from Mastodon, and so opened all these doors for me, and that helped a lot too. So yeah, I mean, he was pivotal in all this. In fact, you know, I think I kind of give him more credit in a lot of ways than just about anyone, really.
Wow. Yeah, and it's funny. I spoke with two of his bandmates on this program a few weeks ago. I spoke with the David and Zach from Publicist UK,
Yeah, yeah,
and they both were, I mean, again, everybody's gushing about Dave,
yeah.
with and David also said to say hello to you. He loves you. So
It's awfully
there's
nice.
so much. There's a lot of overlapping, and it drives me nuts. I also, oddly enough, I know that Kevin Sharp from the band Brewtal Truth is also a huge beer geek, which I don't know if you've ever connected with him, but
Yeah, he's awesome, dude. He may or may not be sober. I'm not sure.
oh,
I know he
okay,
was sober for a while, and I don't know if that's still the case. But
yeah,
but super cool dude also, and he was another person that was super generous in a lot of different ways with me
yeah,
early on, and was a really cool guy to connect with. He was one of the musicians that I interviewed for my book, and he
yeah,
is just yeah, he's another one of those guys that is a lifer,
yeah,
tons of people, and is super supportive of, for instance, he hauled, so there was a guy that I've been in touch with in Italy who owns craft beer, kind of like a bottle shop slash pub sort of place or bar, what, yeah, or
yeah,
whatever. And so he was on the Brewtal Truth tip early on, and like my column. And so when my book came out, he wanted to get copies of it. And the band Brewtal Truth he was also in touch with them, and they were going over to do a European tour, and they were going to do a little event at this guy Teo's bar in Italy. And so we did like a Brewtal Truth slash Brewtal Truth book release, and they did a special beer for them over there. And so those guys schlepped 50 of my books over for me, and for the event I obviously didn't go, but they schlepped the books over for me. And yeah, cool stuff like that.
that's
So
so cool.
yeah, so Kevin's a good guy, and nothing but love for
Yeah,
Kevin and his
yeah,
band. Yeah.
totally. And to be fair, I haven't been in touch with him in 5 years or more, so
Yeah.
didn't know if he'd been sober. He at the time he would post about spicy beers he was drinking and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, he was into
But,
it. I was seriously into it. And
but
yeah. So I don't know what his situation
yeah,
is these days.
totally. I mean, I've got family members in recovery, so I'm. It's interesting. I think I approached drinking with that sort of like cautious reverence because of that, like knowing the power of what I'm playing with.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. It is still a drug or whatever,
yeah, no,
intoxicant. So
yeah,
it's yeah. But what's funny is just quickly getting back to like Witty and his influence
yeah,
and all the connections that he helped me make. One that was had a funny result was the Brawn Dealer from Mastodon. He connected me with Brawn, and Brawn is also salty earth, super cool guy.
yeah,
I'd never met him in person. I'd interviewed him on the phone for my book, and he was great. And then when Mastodon was coming through Seattle one time, I said, "Hey, let's do like a little book signing thing
yeah.
and meet up and whatever." And he was totally into it, totally. And they were touring with Clutch at the time, and it was almost I was going to try to get JP as well, but
Yeah.
unfortunately JP couldn't make it. He had another commitment. So I get this thing set up at the local brewery in Seattle, and Braun's totally down with it. So he said, "Meet me at the venue, pick me up," and we schedule it at a brewery that was just maybe a mile away,
Yeah.
down the street. And so my friend at the bar, we pick him up in this minivan, and we immediately get stuck in the worst Seattle traffic you can imagine. So
Yeah.
I've met Braun in person. He's sitting in this minivan with me and my friend. He's never doesn't know either of us, and we're stuck in traffic. And I'm like, oh, man, this is terrible. It's so embarrassing. And he was so cool about it. I mean, we were probably in that stupid van for 45 minutes to drive a mile to get to this event. And he was like, that's cool, no problem. the nicest guy, coolest guy, most, you know, and he's still friends with me even after all that. And the is at the event, which is before his show, everyone wanted to buy him a beer. Everyone was like, "Oh, hey, Brawn, let me buy you a beer." And he kept having to say, "No, I don't drink before the show. I don't drink before the show." And so finally, the owner of the brewery heard this, and he brings out. They made a house-made root beer, and so he brings out a little glass of that in like a Belgian tulip glass to make it look like Brawn's drinking some beer, but Brawn can drink some root beer and tell everyone he's drinking beer, but so that people would stop offering to buy him beer. But yeah, it was kind of funny. He was so cool about that whole thing. I was so embarrassed. But what are you gonna
do? I mean, to be fair, fancy root beer is so good. Like that's you know, it was one of those things. Like I was off soda for a really long time, and then found my way back through liking beer. I'm like, oh yeah, fancy root beers are really good.
Yeah. I mean, if there are craft brewers that can make amazing root beer, just the same sort of complexity and care that they would make a beer, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that said, I've, tried those boozy root beers, and oh my God, it's not.
Yeah, those are not good. Those things are dangerous too, because they don't really, I tried one. There was one that even had like an imperial version. It was like imperial barrel-aged alcoholic root beer. And I tried it, and I was like, this tastes just like root beer. And if you don't remember that you're not just drinking root beer, you get yourself in trouble pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, it's an experience I don't need to have more than once.
Exactly.
Like when I tried Four Loko. Oh my God.
Yeah.
When it still was the formula that's now illegal. It was like, oh, I can't believe I did this to myself. I don't know why. It was like I had so many friends that were pumped on it, and I'm like, oh sure. Oh God, no.
I live in Victoria, British Columbia, and we don't have those kinds of beers basically in Canada that I'm aware of, that I've seen. But man, I go back down to Seattle, and they sell stuff that I'm like, I don't know how they get away with this. It's like fruit punch, whatever, and just some of the variations of malt liquor are pretty crazy.
Yeah, no, I know it's probably a young person's thing, but I was young when I tried it and thought I was too old for it. I mean, I was maybe 22, and it was not happening for me. So,
well, I will fully admit, in high school, not high school, but in university, at University of Oregon, when I would have band practice and such, there was a local corner grocery store that would sell 40 ounces for 99 cents. So we would get Paps, whatever, Old English.
Oh yeah.
For 99 cents. The trick was you had to drink it really fast though, because 40 ounces warmed up of that crap does not work well. But yeah. So I'm not pretending to be. Have never tried any of those beers or enjoyed any of those beers in some fashion. But at a certain point, I realized that there were better tasting beers. They still do the same things those beers did.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, when I was 21 and in bands, and I was unemployed for most of that time, so it's like my unemployment check can only go so far. I definitely was like, okay, I'm going to drink Old English or King Cobra because I can get 40 ounces of it for $2.50.
Yeah.
And I can get two of them and completely ruin the show. It'll be great.
Yeah, exactly.
Then I learned you don't need to drink that much at the show if you want to actually enjoy the show.
Yeah, remember it too.
Yeah. No. Oh my gosh. No, it's weird though, and I think part of what got me out of that, and probably for you too, was always wanting to like try something new. Like I kind of reached the point where even if I love a beer, I rarely will repeat an experience unless it's like I'm going to a local bar and I'm gonna pick a beer I know I like there.
Yeah.
Is it that way for you? Do you like? Are there any beers that you will always order, or is it always kind of like, oh, I haven't seen this before?
It kind of depends on the circumstances. Yeah, I mean, I'm always looking for try new things for sure, and I also like to really support local stuff as much as possible. But if uh, a local bar gets something that from not local that's really amazing that I've never tried before, then I'll definitely try that. But I, I I I have my go-tos that I like in this area. But I'm like most craft beer drinkers. Is you tend to want to try new things, and especially because there are so many new beers constantly coming out now. So it's it's hard not to in a lot of ways, but it goes both ways. I definitely have my favorites. The only thing I would say though in regard to this is that there have been a lot of trends uh, in craft beer in the last 5 or so years I just haven't really been that interested in. So there's significant swaths of craft beer that I just know that I'm not going to try, or I'm not going to try those beers, or I'm just not like, I'm not a huge fan of hazy IPAs. I don't dislike them, and I get why people like them, but that is a style that I would not
It's
go.
not what you need.
It's just not. And part of it is, to me, they don't represent what I like about IPAs. Simple as that. And I totally get why people like them. They have a lot to entice people with. They're very approachable. They're very kind of extravagant in a lot of ways with their aromas and their flavors and stuff. But to me, what I like about IPAs are bitterness, which is downplayed in most hazies.
Yeah.
And I like those sort of like more grapefruity, piney notes in general. And kind of like, yeah, I don't know, the older style of West Coast IPAs I really like, and I appreciate those more. Those to me are what I look for in an IPA. So yeah, I don't know. I'm always trying different stuff and looking for new things. But on the other hand, I know certain styles that I really do like, and I'll usually look within those styles rather than the certain trends that I just know I don't like. Milkshake IPAs, I don't know what that is, and I don't like it. The ones I've tried, I don't like. It's like, it's not an IPA. I don't know what it is.
I've never tried that, but I've seen the term, and it sounds wrong. Like, if I heard the term milkshake next to stout, it would be something I'd at least want to try, because I'm like, oh, it could be vanilla or something. I don't think that's what milkshake is at all, is it?
Yeah, I think basically it's largely it's lactose. They need
Yeah.
to make them creamy, which really I don't think you need to do that. It's all honestly I believe, and I maybe a brewer listening could correct me on this, but I think a lot of that is trying to get more people into craft beer by making it less intimidating. So
Yeah.
make it sweeter, make it less bitter, make it, give it these milkshake. Well, that sounds delicious, and
Yeah.
a lot of fruit being added to like every freaking style of beer that there is, and
Yeah.
not opposed to fruit in beer, but I was talking with Kevin from the brewer from Wayfinder, and he's super into brewing very traditional German beers, like brewing them exactly the way they should be brewed, just like the Germans do, because the Germans are super fussy about brewing German beers the way they've been done for hundreds of years. And one thing he was talking about is breweries putting fruit into Kolsch, which Kolsch is like a super clean, like a lager style ale, basically. And it
Yeah.
was like,
You
why?
can't even taste the Kolsch if you put fruit in it.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, why would you do that to this beautiful Kolsch beer? But a lot of it just does he was sort of saying, some brewers do it just cover up their inadequacies and their inability to brew a proper Kolsch. Well, it doesn't really, if it comes out and you didn't take the time to do it properly, and so it doesn't really taste like a Kolsch. The solution should not be to throw some fruit at it. Maybe
No.
don't brew it or brew it properly. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of fruit put in beers unnecessarily.
Oh, and I mean, Creek can be such a good thing. I mean, and there are so many interesting takes, but sometimes if you're trying to make something dominate a style to the point where it doesn't resemble that style, uh, don't bother. I've seen much like a few years ago, and I think it's still kind of ongoing in a way, that the sour beer explosion, which I love a good sour beer, but I saw a lot of breweries that clearly, probably had no business doing it. Not like, oh, you're not allowed, so much as this isn't something you've mastered yet.
Yeah.
Instead of doing that, they're like, no, you're gonna drink vinegar or you're gonna drink lemonade, but you're not gonna be drinking a sour. And I mean, that said, I've had some phenomenal sours in the last few years, but that was a really weird one to see as a trend, even given how even a lot of beer drinkers aren't as into them.
Yeah. Don't get me started on those, because that's another one of those areas that I will avoid strenuously. And not sour beers as a whole, but
I know what you mean.
just to differentiate. Yeah, like the sour beers that were sort of like the Belgian style of sour beers. Those are sort of made in a well, not sort of. Those are made in a way that's definitely different than the sour beers that kind of proliferated in North America in the last 5 years or so. Those can be kind of the North American ones can kind of be typified as being kettle sours. So they're not soured using the time honored way of all the different bacteria and barrel aging and such like that produces these beautiful Belgian sours. Kettle sours are more like how like Gosas and Berliner Weisses are made, but the whole thing of like again a good good Gosa I love, because it shouldn't be super sour, should be able to taste the salt, should be able to taste the what is that? It's the coriander, coriander. But none of those things should dominate. It should be like a really refreshing, tasty, light, slightly acidic beer. But then this whole thing of like Berliner Weisses, which is a lot of what people in a lot of the breweries in North America were, when they were making sours, they were basically making a Berliner Weiss, which are designed to not be drunk sour. They're designed to pour a sweet syrup in there, so that you have this like, and it's usually like raspberry or sweet woodruff, so you have this sweetness added to this very tart beer. But a lot of these breweries were just brewing these Berliner Weisses and then adding just like fruit flavors to them, and they're just, if they're not done really really well, they're awful. They're wretched, and that turned me off 100%. Honestly, if somebody says they have a kettle sour or a dry hopped kettle sour, again, it's just a way of covering over the fact that you didn't brew a good tasting sour beer. So just dry hop the shit out of it and try to make it smell like mosaic or whatever.
Yeah.
But not a fan. No, thank you.
It has nothing. The one brewery, and I forget the name of the beer because it's been about 4 years since I've had one, but DeGard Brewing out in Tillamook.
Oh yeah.
They got it right with their sours.
Yeah.
Because they've got like the funky barrels going on, and I think that's the thing. Like, I love funky yeasty beers. Like,
that's how you do it.
Alive.
If if the brewery has a Belgian name and they're making sours, you can bet they're probably going to be the right kind. Cascade in Portland is another one that was doing it the right way.
Absolutely.
And I also, there are plenty of those types of breweries in the U.S. and to a lesser degree Canada, and I love those beers, especially like farmhouse ones that have an element of like funk and tartness and all that stuff. I love those funky, weird, sour and multi mixed fermentation beers. I love those. Those are some of my most beloved styles of beers, because they're so complex and they don't need any fruit added to them. The yeast does all the work, And Anchorage Brewing is another brewery that does this stuff. I mean, they're a brewery that every single beer of theirs I've tried, I just adore. And they're hard to get a hold of, but yeah, just fantastic beers.
Yeah, no, I've had maybe 3 Anchorage beers because when I lived in Portland, sometimes you'd see them there, but
Yeah,
never cheap, but always worth it.
Exactly. Yeah, they're not cheap for sure, but always worth it. They do some really interesting things. I think there's 3 of their beers in my book because I like them so much. And they had one called Love Buzz, which I thought was cool. And they did another one with McKellar called Invader or Invaders or something like that, which was also really good. It was like a funky Brett IPA or something. Just so good. And the cool thing about those beers is you can age them for years, and the Brett just kind of keeps doing its thing. So you just never know. Like you could open it 2 years from now, and it would just, the Brett would have sort of mellowed, but still there. Or you could open it 3 years from now, and it's like, whoo, really funky. But that's the nature of Brett. It's just constantly evolving, and you don't always know exactly how it's going to be. So you have to sort of have a love of the funk to, go into those kind of beers, which I do absolutely love that.
Yeah, I think that's vital. But that's the thing. I think that's why I was so dismayed with the sour explosion.
Yeah,
because it's something I love, and I think especially when you actually love a style and see it being completely, done wrong, to put it blunt, it's disappointing.
Yeah. Well, I think what people, where a lot of breweries miss the mark is where every single brewery needs to be concerned with always, and that's balance. So even the crazy beers in my book, I really tried to make it a point of including beers that I felt like were out there, but there was some semblance of balance. Admittedly, there's some beers in there that are like a little bit over the top and ridiculous and wouldn't be described as balanced. But in general, that's what you should be aiming for. So, it's possible to make a good kettle sour, but you have to do it well, and you have to make sure that everything's in check and balanced. It's not just like a blast of acidity. So I just think that's the key to a quote unquote good beer. And, I think any brewer will tell you the same thing. It's just balance, you just got to make sure that it all makes sense and all comes together the way it should.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got one more question for you that's that I've got written on my very short list here, which is obviously there's a lot of cultural and habitual crossover between beer and heavy metal, in terms of whether it's collectors hunting down a rare thing, or sadly the elitism that kind of comes from people who really should know better than to gatekeep. How do you feel, watching the communities evolve? Because obviously, I've been involved for maybe 15 years. You've been involved twice as long. How has that changed? And each of them, are they getting better? Because I worry.
Yeah, well, it depends on your perspective, I suppose. It has been it's been an interesting journey for me and craft beer, and sort of seeing how it has changed. I stopped doing my column not because it was taken away from me, but because I don't know. To a certain degree, I kind of felt like where craft beer was at, I was, as a whole, I wasn't as interested in it in the same way that I was when I started the column. That's not to say I don't enjoy it and I'm not interested in it, but I'll tell you, even in the time since now, it's been almost 7 years since my book was published, and people have said, "Oh, you should do volume 2," but craft beer has changed so significantly in that amount of time that a lot of the beers in that book wouldn't really be considered extreme beers anymore. So what happened was the craft beer, as it has always done, as it's been doing since the 80s, continue to evolve and expand and change, and brewers, always in search of the next thing or the next whatever, continue to push the envelope. So, I could look through that book now and go, a lot of these styles, there are lots of breweries that do these commonly, frequently,
Yeah.
Even now I could probably just do a book of nothing but metal beers, beers that have a band name or metal, whatever, some specific metal connection.
Yeah.
So, craft beer has changed significantly, a lot in that amount of time. And, I don't know, for better or for worse, there are still great beers being made, but has craft beer gotten a little bit more ridiculous? I kind of think so, in a way that I don't necessarily like. Even if you were to look at the number of breweries when my book came out versus what there are now, I don't know the numbers, but I would venture to guess that it grew. I don't know if it doubled the number of breweries in that amount of time, but there are a lot more breweries brewing a lot more beer. So it's grown. The long and short of it, it's grown. And, with growth comes good parts, good, bad parts. In a lot of ways, there's more really good beer, more accessible to more people, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But there's just been some weird trends, junky trends that I could just do without. And I think you could say a lot of the same stuff about metal, although metal's journey is a little farther along in a lot of ways. Like, I mean, there are metal bands that are known worldwide, but I don't think necessarily you could say that there are craft beer brands, and I mean real craft beer brands, that sort of would have the same notoriety. There are some that are pretty well known, but all you need to do is look at sort of the sales. Craft beer is still, a fraction of total beer sales worldwide, and it's growing, but it's growing in small ways. Whereas, metal has a significant number of fans worldwide, and there are, like, Metallica is one of the biggest rock bands in the world, and are they a metal band still? I don't know, but they start out as a metal band, and they're universally known. So I guess you can kind of make some comparisons, but metal's journey has been going on a little bit longer, so it's a little bit farther along. But a lot of the same things I said about there are aspects of metal that just have no appeal to me, and I figured that out. I listen to it and I go, no, that doesn't speak to me.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of people that it does speak to, and it's great. I'm not casting any aspersions on those bands, those styles. Just not for me, And I found the stuff that I like, and there's lots of bands out there doing that kind of stuff. And so same with craft beer, I know what types of beers that I like. I know the brands, or whatever, and I can always find that. But I do think there continues to be the connection, in the sense that the people do find their way to either one of those things, find their way there because they don't want what everyone else is doing. They want something beyond what's on top 40 radio or whatever. That's probably not even a thing anymore. Whatever's on pop radio. Man, I'm really dating myself over and over in this.
I still use the term too. So.
Yeah. Well, anyway, the point being, popular music, people that are sort of content to listen to sort of the hits, probably the same people that generally are happy drinking whatever, or they have their brand that they drink over and over and over and over and over again. That seems like craft beer drinkers, maybe they like bluegrass, maybe they like jazz, maybe they like whatever, Grateful Dead, but if you found your way to craft beer and you like yourself a nice imperial stout, chances are you're a little bit more discerning in other ways, other areas of your life. That's my theory.
Yeah, no, I mean it's funny. You said my dad has become a craft beer guy. I think in the last maybe 5 to 8 years, and he's also I mean, he's my dad's 66, 67. He was a punk at one point, but now he's a jazz guy, and he's really a jazz guy. And so
Yeah,
it's one of the things where it's just like, oh yeah, of course you're just plowing through whatever it is, looking for something niche.
yeah,
Uh, I
exactly.
think that's cool.
Yeah.
Um,
So what are you drinking today, by the way? I never asked you that. What are you drinking?
so yeah, no, I've got from Suarez Family Brewing. I got this. It's the first time I've tried it. It's a plum beer,
Oh.
which I was like, well, that's a pretty broad term. It's
That's it. They just call it a plum beer.
yeah, it is oak ripened country beer of mixed fermentation
Ah, yeah.
on whole cherries for a good long while. So it has definitely got that kind of that funk and freeness to it.
Yeah, sounds great. I'd love that beer.
Yeah, no, which I was really glad. It was the guest I had on Tuesday actually. She created this list of New York breweries that were either delivering or offering pickup during the pandemic, and I didn't even know that was a thing. Because I just remember learning about shipping beer to people and how risky, and dubious the legality is. And so I never even thought I could order beer. And these folks are upstate, and I don't drive. Well, I mean, I don't have a car because I live in Brooklyn.
Right.
And so I just went to their website, and lo and behold, they shipped me a case of beer. And so I had no idea what I was getting, and it happened to be really good.
That's awesome.
So that
Great.
yeah, no, I like that.
Yeah. Most of the breweries here in town, yeah, once we were on lockdown, they immediately advertised that they would deliver. And it was kind of funny
Yeah.
because I was like, yeah, that sounds like something I'd like to have done. And I go to look into it, and they're like, they were so slammed, and they, because they didn't typically deliver door to door, and they didn't have like a whole fleet, that they were like, well, we can get to you next week. And I was like, but I need
Yeah.
beer now. So I'm sure it's mellowed out, and they're more, they've got it under control now. But initially, it was like every single person wanted their beer delivered, and all the breweries were just like, push their limit. But no, it makes sense. It's a good thing that they did, and it's another way to keep everyone safe and away from
Yeah.
and drinking good beer.
Exactly. And have you had any quarantine staples?
Yes, shout out to Parallel 49 over in Vancouver on the mainland. They have a great IPA called Filthy Dirty, which sounds like a Motorhead song or something. But it's a great IPA that I have enjoyed a lot of during this time because it was easy to get a hold of over here. They didn't deliver. They're on the mainland, but it was easy to get a hold of over here. And it just ticks all the boxes for me. So, I and the fact of the matter is this has been one of the challenging parts for me in this, is going back to what we were talking about earlier, in liking to have a lot of different beers, try a lot of different things. I haven't done that because I can't go to the store and go, I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that. So I've just been perfectly happy with, just kind of going with the ones that I have bought in quantity. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's weird. I've gone from buying almost exclusively single bottles where applicable to I'm getting a 4 or 6 pack 100% of the time.
Yeah, totally.
And, it's interesting though, because I don't mind it. There's certainly the part of me that, like, especially the Instagram is terrible for me in this regard, because I see other beer people and I'm like, oh, I want that, I want that, I want that. And it's like, no, I don't have the money or the time. Because I'm not drinking a lot during this. I have nowhere to go. It would be awfully annoying to my girlfriend if I was just wasted every day.
Right. Yeah. Sitting around drunk all day. Yeah.
So it's like, I have a beer, sometimes two, a few times a week.
Yeah.
And more than that. And I just also, I'm trying not to be one of those people that is like, oh, I'm putting on pounds during this. It's like, no, I don't need to come out of this with more problems.
Yeah. Well, I've counteracted that by bicycling like crazy, which is not something I do, but we live here on Vancouver Island, which is a giant island off the coast of Canada. So lots of room here. We've been very fortunate that in the on the entirety of the island, and there's almost 1 million people on the island. There's only been 127 cases in total of the coronavirus. So, we're not behaving, business as usual here. Part of the reason that there's been so few cases is because we've been on lockdown like everyone else. But there's a lot of space here, and it's a community that biking. There's lots of bike trails, and so my son is 13 with lots of energy, and we have been riding pretty much every single day. And today we did, I think, almost 20 miles. So I've actually lost weight, I think, during this whole thing, and I've been eating very well, and I've been treating myself properly, but I've also been exercising like crazy as well. And so it's crazy.
I mean, I guess I'm eating well too. I finally got on we have an exercise bike. I finally got on that yesterday for the first time since this began, and I was like, oh yeah, I should be doing this. Because it's like, today I think I had like polenta and fried mushrooms for lunch. It's like that is not a light meal.
Yeah. Well,
it's good.
You're in a totally different situation, and honestly, I really feel for you. That is, I really feel for all my friends and family and everything in the United States, and with that whole situation, and particularly people like yourself in New York City. Which is just like crazy, and I feel so fortunate that I can go for these rides and go out, and I have that opportunity and I don't have to be so fearful. So I'm sorry you're in that situation. That stinks, and it's tough.
We're doing what we can. I think mercifully I had about a year to prepare being a chronically ill person, and now I'm mostly better, so I'm grateful for that. But also, I'm very accustomed to not doing a whole lot outside of the home.
Right, yeah. Okay. Well, one thing, this is the thing that's been hard for me psychologically is, and I know everyone's in the same boat, but this kind of thing affects everyone differently. But that whole notion of like you cannot do all these things that you normally do, and we don't know when you'll be able to do them again. That psychologically helped me for a while. It's one thing if and with your not to minimize your illness, because I know that what you went through was very challenging, but you're going through treatment, and you're probably being told by doctors, well, if we get to this point, you'll be able to do this, and yada yada yada. But this is sort of like,
it's a huge question mark.
We don't know. You might be in your apartment for the next 18 months. I mean, I'm joking. Hopefully that's not the case, but there's so much that's completely out of our hands. And in the case of the United States, in the hands of some very stupid people that, that's how frustrating is that, So.
No, absolutely. As you said, it would be bad enough if it were simply what it is. But when you have celebrated ineptitude on top of it, I spoke with my grandmother today, and she's 94, and she said that she's never seen such I mean she probably used gentler words, but such foolish and scary behavior from the people in power in this country in her lifetime. And that's a long lifetime. So
yep, I know, and she's seen a lot for sure. Yeah.
I mean, old Jewish woman, who lived through a lot of anti-Semitism and stuff. She's saying this is the worst, and
Yeah.
it puts it in perspective for me.
I had to stop paying attention to a lot of social media. Honestly, I couldn't. On top of everything else, it was just like too much. And I just realized I just needed to worry about my family and my situation
Of course.
where I live. And I can't be, I live in Canada and I'm a Canadian citizen now. I'm also US, but and so I've never been more thankful for that. And the way that this province has handled everything has been, it's been incredible. And we haven't had a new case of coronavirus on the island in weeks.
Good.
And in the province, the province as a whole, which has, I don't know, 5 million people, there hasn't been it's dwindled down to like a handful of new cases every day, for the last little while. And those are all, they know where those all came from. You know what I mean? It's tracked. Yeah, exactly. So we're really fortunate here. And so we're already phasing into things opening up, and they're talking about I actually get to go camping in a few weeks, which I'm excited to do with my son. Yeah, there's some light at the end of the tunnel here. There's a lot of stuff's going to be still weird, but there's some lightening up, which I appreciate.
Yeah. And you talked about focusing on your family and the world that you can control and impact, which is important for all of us, even if we are. I don't think anybody that's doing that is not compassionate about the rest of the world, but if you can't take care of yourself, you can't help anything. I wanted to ask you, in a post Brewtal Truth, at least as a column world, what's next? What are you up to? And I know that you were gearing up to make another book.
Yeah, so I'll tell you about that. When I got done with doing the Brewtal Truth column for almost 10 years, I had I think more than 120 columns, basically, or not quite 120. Anyway, my thought was, because some people kind of came into the Brewtal Truth thing at different points, and Decibel's been very canny about not putting everything on the website. They put certain things on the website, but mostly it's like web specific content, and everything in the magazine generally stays in the magazine. So my thought was to, with Albert's blessing at Decibel, compile all the columns into a book, and even kind of update them a little bit. Every single one of them, add a little bit of content each one, because some of them are 10 years old, and craft beers change a lot. So and I put a little commentary, a little about sort of introducing each one. Anyway, I looked into the different possibilities of how to do this. And one of the things I came across was ink shares, which basically, if you can get a number of people to sort of commit financially, it's kind of like a GoFundMe kind of thing to a certain degree. Then they'll publish your book. They'll basically take on it and design it and all that. So I tried to go that route, but I couldn't. I came nowhere close to meeting the threshold for them to publish it, and so I then set about trying to find another publisher, and I sent around to a lot of different agents and stuff like that. But the long and short of it is anthologies are kind of a tough sell. Let's put it that way. And so got some positive feedback and comments, but no one is really willing to take a bite because realistically, my column ran in a niche publication, so it wasn't like I was syndicated in nationally or anything like that. So and it kind of went back to why my first book, The Brewtal Truth Guide to Extreme Beers, was not a New York Times bestseller. Surprisingly, it was very niche, and maybe it was ahead of its time, but it didn't sell especially well. There are people that bought it that are super passionate about it and love it, and I'm very thankful for that. But it didn't sell super well, and so when you're an author that writes a book about a certain thing that doesn't sell really well, then when you go to write something else about that same thing, and they go, well, but your first one didn't sell really well. What's the incentive for them to publish your second book that was along the same lines? So long story short, no takers. And I have the option of self-publishing. There are a lot of different other options, but I didn't want to pursue that. I wanted to have somebody else take care of it. So it's still there, and if the opportunity arises, I would see about publishing it. But it was more just like when I wrapped up my Decibel column, I wanted to just kind of move on in a way, and that seemed like sort of a way to wrap it up and then put it out and then move on to something else. Yeah. So in the meantime, I'm not necessarily focusing on so much craft beer writing, because I just kind of, I don't know, I'm more interested in music writing, to be honest with you. So I'm working on developing more book projects that are music related, and I'm continuing to do that. I don't have anything specific to share with you about that, but that's what I'm working on. That's kind of my goal. So, and I'm continuing to write for Decibel, and I'm continuing to. I literally wrote 2 Hall of Fame pieces this week for Decibel, so I'm super stoked about those, and those are really fun to do. So, yeah, doing that and just kind of trying to get some different music book projects off the ground, hopefully. So, fingers crossed.
I'm excited to see what they'll be. And it just popped into my mind when you're talking about going back to music. I thought about the playlist you made today, and I wanted to thank you because I knew a good majority of what you shared, because it was a lot of classics, and even though they weren't as gateway for me, like coming in, and I had to go backwards to get them.
Yeah,
there was a band that you put on there, Green River, who I didn't know that well. I knew one song they did because the Melvins kind of covered it on one of my favorite albums of theirs.
Yeah, Leech, right?
Yep. And I love the Gluey Porch treatments. Like, I love the Melvins, celebrate their whole catalog, but that was my first, and it was very special to me. And I remember when I found out that Leech existed in another form from another band, I loved that, but I don't know what did it. I never dug beyond the song Leech. So now it kind of gave me that reminder. It's like, oh, I really need to spend some time with Green River.
Well, so the first Leech came off of their first EP, which is not my favorite Green River record. It was weird. They were trying to be a lot of different things and not doing any of them very well. It's even, I'm a huge Green River fan, but I don't even really like that down EP or mini album or whatever. But the song that I put on there from their Dry as a Bone, which was the first Sub Pop one, I love that album. And that album was musically hugely influential on me. Like, I think it was released in like 86 or 87 or something. But I wanted, whatever band I was in at that time, I wanted to sound just like that because it ticked so many boxes for me. It was heavy metal. It was kind of punk rock. It was kind of a lot of things. And they just looked so, like, I don't know how to describe it, but they kind of looked like Hanoi Rocks meets Aerosmith meets, I don't know. But I just thought they were the coolest band at the time. And so that and their Rehab Doll album, I'm huge fan of. And I obviously love Mudhoney as well, because that's sort of the next thing that came after Green River. But yeah, that Dry as a Bone EP, unbelievable, great stuff. I liked it. That's awesome to hear.
Yeah, no, because I was listening, I'm like, oh, this rips. Like, I was, I was, of course, I'm like sitting there chopping vegetables to make food, listening to it, and just like, oh, this is really killer. Appreciated that.
Also, really quickly before your next point, is if you haven't heard that Helicopters song, seek it out. It is so good. And that Helicopters album, it's Paying the Dues, is like the missing link between the new wave of British heavy metal and punk rock. I don't know. It's amazing because it's Nick Anderson from Entombed, but he's playing guitar, and that album is just so good. And I don't, for some reason, it originally came out on like a European label, and then Sub Pop issued it in the late 90s, and then for some reason it's just out of print or something. But if you ever find it, you can find it online. It's called Paying the Dues, and that song Soul Seller. Well, actually, you know what? Go on YouTube and just look for Soul Seller, and there's a live clip of them playing it that just rips. It is so good. It just kicks ass. Anyway, check it out.
No, I need to. It's funny because I know some of their stuff that came after that because that's more widely in circulation. And again, as a young person digging, I was like, "Oh, Entombed is good. What is this?"
Yeah.
Very different.
Very different.
But that was good. It was good for me.
Yeah, later stuff, the Helicopters, I wasn't even that into because they kind of became like obsessed with Kiss. And once this guy Dragon was out of the band, who was in simultaneously in the Backyard Babies and the Helicopters. Once he left the band, I felt like he was sort of like the punk rock heart. And then Nicky Anderson just kind of went full on Kiss worship, or like 70s, way more 70s. Yeah. And I stopped listening. Honestly, I think Paying the Dues was the last one I really dug. There's one before that that's even like trashier called it's called Super Shitty to the Max, I believe, and well titled, but the production isn't as good on that. But man, Paying the Dues is just a classic, really good.
That sounds like I got my evening sorted. I love that.
Yeah, check it out for sure. I should probably get going because my computer's dying. I just noticed that my battery, and I'm sitting in a car, so I have no opportunity to plug it in. But.
No worries. Do I have time for one last quick question?
Yeah, of course.
Cool. Because I've been asking every guest I have this just because it's relevant to me, and I've learned new things from it. What would you say are records that have come out in 2020 that have you excited? Like, it doesn't have to be album of the year, but what are you enjoying that's new?
Oh man, that is a weird, tough question for me because my head has so not been in 2020. But hold tight because let me just check my my iTunes, see something really quickly here. And I will give you something of a reply.
No worries.
Yeah, it's funny because the other thing is like sometimes I'm writing about albums in late 2019 that come out in 2020, and I don't always know sort of like what's coming out when. Oh, you know what? I'll tell you what it is. The new Midnight, the latest Midnight.
Yeah.
Birth by Blasphemy or something like that. That kicked my ass. And I'll tell you, that kind of stuff is like right up my alley. As far as like, especially stuff that's kind of current.
Yeah.
I love a lot of that same kind of stuff, but I really like that. That's going to end up in my top 10 at the end of 2020 for sure.
And I still haven't listened to it, so I need to. That's immediate.
Yeah, I like those guys, but there's a certain amount of shtick involved there, which I kind of like. It's not the most female empowering music in the world, and I get that. But I like to think that Jamie approaches it with a sense of humor, and I don't know, but I could see how women would not, find it very funny or empowering or whatever. I get that. But, I'm one to, for better or worse, approach a lot of stuff like that. And well, as an example, when I was listening to Venom and like Welcome to Hell and black metal and Iron Maiden's The Number of the Beast, I'm pretty sure that they weren't actually worshiping the devil, and that it would be okay if I listened to this music and I wouldn't go straight to hell. I'm not religious anyway, but in the same way that I feel like Midnight and listening to, his lyrics, they're so kind of ridiculous and over the top that I'm quite certain that none of this is actually being practiced. It is just for entertainment purposes, much in the way that we might watch a horror movie or, a B movie,
Yeah.
horror movie or something. So anyway, that's my sort of like my apology for listening to Midnight.
Yeah, I get that.
Sorry, ladies.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like especially it's a long tradition in rock and roll in general, and it's it's going to be hard to fully divorce from that for a long time to come. I think it doesn't mean that the people doing it, though, as you said, like I think a lot of it is shtick. Like somebody said, in regards to that general topic, a lot of the time it's like, well, you don't believe that the Misfits are actually zombies.
Right.
Slayer are, half of them are Christian. There's a degree to where it's just like, okay, you don't have to love what they're singing about to know that it's maybe not sincere.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And I get why people are offended by some of that stuff. I get it, and I fully appreciate that. So anyway, but I like that kind of stuff. The Midnight, the Motorhead, Venom-ish kind of stuff.
Yeah. Now, if the second something takes the Celtic Frost or Motorhead box for me, like there's going to be at least a fondness for it. Just
totally.
Oh, this is, even if it's totally derivative, totally shitty, I can still say, oh, this would be fun as hell to see.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Goes good with beer too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll let you get going so that your computer doesn't die on you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. It was an absolute delight.
My pleasure.
It's really terrible week over here, and I'm sure in most of the world. So things like this they mean a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. It's a nice, distraction for you, me, and for the 5 people who are currently watching, and hopefully more people will be watching later. But thank you so much for doing it. If nothing else, I really enjoyed just having a chat with you for the first time. I know we've corresponded or whatever through social media and stuff over the years, but it was awesome to sort of chat in this way and kind of get to know each other better and hear your stories as well. So thank you very much for having me. And anytime you want to check in and chat with me again, I'm happy to. So
that sounds wonderful. Well, take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, you too. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Have a nice evening, Adam.
Thanks, you too.
All right, folks. So that was Adem Tepedelen. His last name is somehow more of a doozy than mine. He taught me how to say it earlier so that I wouldn't fuck it up. Thank you for those who've watched this far. There are links below to follow both of us on social media, to buy Adam's books, book singular. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Shama. I didn't address you earlier because Adam was talking and I didn't want to cut him off. It's been good to have you guys sitting here, joined in. Yeah, and I think beer and heavy metal still. I go through phases where I'm, into other things concurrently, but they're too constant. So it was really cool to talk to him. I'm going to be announcing this coming Tuesday's episode tomorrow. So, excuse me. Some of those kind of the funky beers get you a little bit. So check out my social media channels tomorrow, and you'll get to see who I'm talking to on Tuesday. It's a friend of mine who's been doing wonderful things to celebrate the arts during the pandemic quarantine, and I think that's really vital. I'm looking forward to talking to them. So thank you guys for being here. This is Black Metal and Brews. As always, if there's something you'd like to see, somebody you'd like to see me interview, a beer you'd like me to drink, let me know. You can leave a comment on YouTube or send me an email at blackmetalandbrews@gmail.com. And if you want to throw me a buck or two, because it costs me money to make these, the streaming service that I'm using to interview people costs me a substantial amount of money a year. I'm at patreon.com/blackmetalandbrews. That's also below. But because there's a pandemic on, I get it if you're not working or if your means are not what they used to be. Anyway, loved you all. Cheers. Hopefully soon I'll have a glass that isn't this wine glass from a Dollar Tree. And stay safe, stay well, and Keep drinking if you drink.